Everyone knows that I love to cook catfish, so I'm going to share with you some of my secrets. I've been cooking fish for over 35 years across the country and even into Canada for tens of thousands of people. And I think there are some secret elements to be very effective when you're frying catfish or any other kind of fish. Welcome to All Things Food with John Woods. I love to cook, but I cook to love. So let's talk food. So of course here I have the good old Mississippi grain-fed and farm-raised catfish, which is one of my favorites. So that's the key ingredient. So I'm going to simplify this. Many people make their fish frying very complicated, but I'm going to kind of cut it down to some of the basic elements today. Whenever you fry fish, there are some things that you must have. You must have a good cooking oil. I like to use soybean oil because it can stand up to a high heat. It doesn't transfer flavor, so if I'm cooking multiple items in the oil, whether it's a hush puppy or shrimp or fish or fries, those flavors aren't transferring back and forth to one another. That's very, very important because we don't want our French fries to taste like fish or our hush puppies to taste like shrimp. So anyway, get a good quality oil, one that will stand up to high temperatures. Soybean oil is good, as I said. A lot of people in the South use peanut oil. And once you buy an oil, don't abuse your oil. Don't run it at too high of a temperature. Don't drop a lot of breading into your oil. And when you're finished, cool it down, strain it through a coffee filter, put it back in the jug, airtight jug, and you can use it time and time again, especially when oil can cost as much as $50 to $60 for a large container. So take care of your oil, and your oil will take care of you. That's ingredient number one. Second of all, what about the fish itself? As I said, I'm using pond-raised grain-fed catfish today. You can use any other kind of fish, bass, brim, whatever. And on a fillet like this, that's about a 5 to 7 ounce fillet, I like to cut it into narrower strips. Now, some people will take a fish fillet and they'll cut it at a 90-degree angle like so. I don't really prefer that style. I don't like the look of that, but a lot of people do that, and I guess that's what they want to do in the little chunks or nuggets, I'd call it. I like to take that fillet, put it on the board, take my knife, and just come down at a slight angle and make more of a strip than a nugget. I think that just makes a prettier presentation. So you just go at a slight angle, and like that one I can get 4 pieces out of it, and that's a good size fillet right there. So that's the way I like to cut my fish. You can do it how you want to, but I think that's a good technique right there. So let's talk about the fish bread, and this is where it really gets confusing with a lot of people I see doing videos on frying fish. They have multiple ingredients: mustard, buttermilk, salt, pepper, paprika, garlic, onion powder, and the list goes on and on and on. You don't need any of those things to have great fish. In fact, I don't think you should mask the flavor of the fish by using all those ingredients. So I have a simple recipe. I have 3 ingredients. You can find this at almost any grocery store. One is cornmeal. I prefer the white cornmeal to the yellow because it's much lighter, and I just like that texture and flavor a little better. And I have a little pepper that I'm going to put into my cornmeal. And then I'm going to take a little kosher salt, not table salt, but a little kosher salt, and I'm going to mix those 3 ingredients together. Be sure not to get too much salt in there. You can always add to, you can't take away, so I'll usually mix it together and then taste it, but I'm pretty comfortable that I have the right amount in there today. Now let's talk about how we bread this fish. We want to preserve that cornmeal as much as possible. So I put it in a pan much like this, push the cornmeal up to one side, put my fish on the other side of it, and I'll take that fish there laid out, take some of the cornmeal, put on top of it, and then I'll just toss it like this. Really good. You notice I didn't soak it in milk, I didn't soak it in beer. I just used the natural moisture that was on the fish. If your fish is a little dry, you might want to put a little bit of water on it. Not too much because we don't want to get that cornmeal caked too much on our fish, so I'm just going to toss it until it's evenly coated, and see what a nice light coating that is. And when that fries up, that's going to be absolutely perfectly golden brown. One trick I learned a long time ago is if you take these fillets and lay them out on a sheet pan and let that cornmeal dry a little bit, it'll actually make that fillet a little crispier if you want that when you're frying your fish. So our fryer is getting hot over here. Now let's talk about fryers for 1 second. Fortunately, I'm using an electric fryer today. This is just a very inexpensive fryer that I purchased at Walmart probably 5 or 6 years ago. It's quite old. It wasn't very expensive. And the reason I like using one of these is you can regulate the temperature exactly the temperature you want. Now, when I look at some other videos, it's all over the board as to what temperature you should cook catfish. Now, when I tell you that I've cooked catfish for tens of thousands of people over the last 35 years, that's really not an exaggeration. So I feel like I'm kind of an authority on this matter somewhat. And I think that the perfect temperature to cook catfish is 350 degrees. I did another video. In fact, the very first video that we filmed was on catfish, a longer video, where I demonstrated the temperature at 325 and the fish went right to the bottom. It was very greasy. 350, it came out perfectly. 375, it was a little crispier, but it was still okay. But 400, and some people cook their fish at 400, was totally burned and the fish shriveled up too much. So what's the perfect temperature? I think 350 is, but no more than 375. So monitor the temperature, make certain that it stays at least 350, no higher than 375 degrees. And I think you're going to be well on your way to cooking the perfect fish, whether it's catfish or any other kind of fish. Now, you may not have the luxury of owning one of these, and they're not very expensive. So I'll use sometimes a cast iron Dutch oven like this and enamel coated. This is a Lodge, and it works very well. And I can put it on the gas burner stove, put enough oil in it, and not too much, and you'll need a thermometer to check the temperature. And it's a little more difficult to monitor, but if you put the right amount of oil in there, not too much, and you don't overcrowd the pan with the fish, this method seems to work just really perfectly fine. Even sometimes I'll cook it in a small cast iron skillet on the stove and just put less oil in it, and it does fine as well. So we're going to let that get up to 350. And let me tell you something about when we drop the fish in here. A lot of people will take the fish by the handfuls and drop it in, and all that excess cornmeal goes into the grease, which will end up burning your grease over time. You don't want to do that. I kind of like to shake it off a little bit when I put it in there. And we're not going to take these fillets and drop them all in to one place in the fryer, because what will happen is they'll stick together. So we'll take these fillets and we'll drop them in various places in the fryer where we almost layer the fillets. Now, how many do we put in? It depends on the size of the fryer. With an electric fryer or one that has a thermostat on it, I'll cook a few more fillets than I would in something like this, because I know the temperature is not going to drop down and the fillets are going to cook fine. But don't overcrowd your fryer. What will happen is, if you do, these fillets will stick together and you'll have a nice crispy fillet on the outside, but one that's not cooked where they've stuck together. So just learn the right technique in putting the fish into the fry basket. Another thing that you shouldn't do, and a lot of people will do this, they'll put the fish in the fryer and then they'll take this basket and they'll start to shake it, thinking that they're breaking the fish apart. Well, I know what they're thinking, but you don't want to shake the basket too early, because if you do, a lot of that breading that you put on there is going to come off and it's not going to be the best quality fish. So what I normally do, as a rule of thumb, I'll drop the fish into the fryer, let it cook for 1.5 to 2 minutes, and then I'll gently shake the basket. If I need to take some tongs and break a few pieces loose, I'll do that. So these are some tips I've learned over the years. If you implement these as you cook fish, you're going to be a fish frying professional. So our temperature's up to the desired temperature of 350, so we're going to start dropping these fillets in there. Remember, I said we're going to shake them off a little bit. We're going to drop them, kind of spread them out in there, not on top of one another. We don't want to drop them into one big clump. See how the oil is kind of bubbling up? I like to see that. I know the oil's doing its job. If I had it down at a lower temperature, it would be very inactive right there, so everything's looking very good. So someone's probably asking the question, how long do you cook the fish? Well, I have never had an answer for that question because it could vary. It depends on the size of the fillet. It depends on the temperature of the fryer. It depends on how many fish you have in the fryer. And so I've just kind of learned over the years kind of to look at it. And someone else will say, well, is fish finished or is it cooked when it floats? Well, I actually did an experiment on that one time because I thought that was an old wives' tale. But fish is finished or is cooked completely when it gets to 145 degrees internal temperature. So what I did one day is I took the fryer, and as soon as a fish fillet started floating in the fryer, I pulled it out and I checked the internal temperature, and it was right at 145 degrees. So we're going to do that today, just to see how accurate it is. But I like to cook my fish a little longer. I like it crispier, so I'll cook it probably up to 160, 165. It doesn't dry it out, it's still perfectly fine. Looks like we have a fillet starting to float over here. So I'm gonna just check that temperature. We're just experimenting today. So I have my digital thermometer here. Stick it right in the middle. Actually, that's reading fairly high already. So it didn't take that fish very long to cook. So technically, yes, it is done, but to me, it's not crispy enough. So I'm gonna put it back in there. I'm gonna cook mine probably another 2 minutes after it begins to float. And I think most people like their fish a little crispier. You notice I'm not really messing with it too much. I may shake it a little bit, but it's perfectly fine. So I believe the fish is looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that basket up here and get my tongs and take some of it out. Put it over here on the plate. Nice and crispy. It's not greasy at all. I think we did a pretty good job there today, folks. Look at that beautiful catfish right there. Look how nice and firm it is. Again, it's not greasy and very light breading. Remember what I told you about the breading. Don't overdo it. Be as simple as possible when you're cooking fish. Don't mask the flavor of the fish with all these other crazy ingredients that people like to use. So let's kind of recap. We have good oil. Oil's at the proper temperature. We have a good, consistent breading that's going to work every time that we fry the fish, and we cook it for the proper length of time, and you can't get any better than that. So thanks for watching today. Be sure to like this channel, share it with your friends, and subscribe. And I'll see you next week on All Things Food with John Woods. But remember, love to cook, but cook to love.